The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, good evening, good morning, and hello to wherever you are. Welcome to Topic 2, our second webinar, a live webinar in the massive online open course for Agile project management. I hope everyone's joining in with some high expectations, and some of you have said some positive things about enjoying what we've done so far, which is fantastic. Thank you for all that, that positive feedback. We're hoping we'll give you an equally interesting session tonight. We will kick off by talking about some of the housekeeping things, just for those of you who've just joined in or might have forgotten some of the hows and wheres of how this works. So we'll cover all that before we get into the meat of our topic tonight. Now, as usual, we have some excellent help with regards to the questions. So please do put your questions through, your comments, your feedback, etc., as we go during the webinar tonight. And we'll make sure that both Alex and James are on the ball and ready to respond as best they can. We will, of course, take some pauses and some time out to answer some interesting questions as we go along the way during the webinar itself. Now, hopefully some of you might have enjoyed contributing to that poll. I will put the results up before we wrap up our webinar a little bit later. For those of you who are interested to see what the general consensus was with that question. But in the meantime, let's have a chat about the basic things. The questions box. Now, for those of you who might not have used it already, the questions box is in the control panel of your webinar software. That's where you should put in any comments, questions, and feedback that you have already. So anything you think of along the way, or anyone that other people are thinking of that gets answered to everybody, you'll be able to see that there in the questions box. So that's something to have a think about. The course portal, I want to bring your attention to this and make a point of it, because this is the resource location for you all to find other information. Now, I know that a lot of you have found the webinars interesting, but they're only half of the story and only half the content that we're offering. On the portal is a series of pre-recorded audio lectures that is the precursor each week, each topic, to these webinars. So what these pre-recorded lectures do is give you the first step or the first stage in the theory, and then in the webinars we build upon that. So the intention is that by listening to the pre-recorded audio, you're one step ahead of what we're going to cover. Now, obviously you can do them in reverse. There's no harm or problem in that. But like all good stories, we generally get more out of Chapter 2 when we read Chapter 1 first. So I would encourage all of you to get on the portal if you haven't already, download those each week. There's typically 3, and they're no more than 20 minutes each on average. So you've got an hour's worth of audio. And of course, if you've got a fancy player, you could speed them up, play me back at chipmunk speed, and get through it a little bit faster. Generally, the pre-recorded audios are going to be up several days before the next webinar. So although they're not up there yet, they'll be up there in the next day or so. You'll be able to enjoy those and get into those within or before the end of the weekend. So if you want to get them ahead of time, you can. Of course, there are forums in the same portal. So if you do have any other comments or anything to discuss, or anything to raise, there's some interesting resources being included up there now. We've got some people putting forward some links to various websites that they've found useful. The webinar recordings are also found in the portal. So the webinars get recorded. They'll be available in 3 formats. There'll be a YouTube link. There'll be downloadable recordings and audio versions, and that's the place to find all of that. There is, of course, a bit of a study guide, which is the document that gives you some ideas as to what you need to think about. It also mentions something in a textbook. Now, I want to explain before we go further what this textbook thing is all about. There is a textbook that is part of the full subject in Charles State University and the IT Masters course. So the full Agile course includes detailed study of a textbook. And of course, if you become a student of that subject in the Master's program or a postgrad program, then that textbook will be supplied to you as part of that process. However, in this short course, it's optional reading. It's not something you have to read, because the online test at the end of this short course is not going to include questions that you'll only find an answer to in that textbook. However, a lot of what we do talk about in the pre-recorded lectures and in the webinar does go into a bit more detail in the textbook. So it's useful. It might help you evaluate what you're learning, and it might help you expand on it. but it's not essential in order to do well in the exam or the test for this course, for this short course. So that's something for you to think about. The readings that we put in there in the study guides are just what sections would be appropriate for this particular topic each week as we go. And that's the portal address. So that's where you go. That's the link. If you can't find an email that gives you your login credentials to that, if it's disappeared, you would have only got it shortly after you enrolled, and that might have been a while ago and you can't track it down. Go to that website and at the login prompt, follow the process for a lost password or forgot password, etc. That will ask you for your email address, and you would use the email address that you enrolled with. And if you're not sure what that email address is, it's the same email address to which you were sent the reminders for these webinars. So the exact same address. So use that address, put that in the system, and it should send you a process for recovering your password and getting a login to access all that material. Now, I did mention we'll be taking questions as we go through the discussion tonight. I will separate the admin questions that some of you might have, and we'll have a special point along the way where we'll pause our thinking and take some off-topic questions. So we will do those, but we might only pause for the topical questions until we get to a major pause along the way through our discussion tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the principles that are covered, and this is some of the high-level thinking that goes behind the Agile process. So when the Agile concepts were developed and as they've been evolving from a conceptual perspective. They've been evolving from a high level. And this means that a lot of what Agile talks about is at a fairly high philosophical level. And so principles have evolved and been developed rather than processes. So this is somewhat different to those of you who have experienced things such as Prince2 or the PMI Body of Knowledge, where there's a lot of process information about sequence of events and activities that need to happen or should happen in a certain way. What Agile has done is said, well, these are the beliefs. This is the philosophical structure with which we go about tackling the challenges that come up. One of the important things of this is the relationship with value. So the principle of value over constraints is trying to raise the question of what is the difference between value and constraint? And it comes back to the focus of which we apply. As practitioners in project development, it's our attitude and our approach. It's the priority that we assign to certain things. And what we say in Agile is that value is the ultimate goal of everything we do. So it's the core purpose of what we're doing. It's the core function of what the project is all about, what the people are all about. So it makes it a fairly important concept and a fairly important word. Value is purpose. It's why we do what we do. It's why we do the project at all, not simply why we do Agile. It's why we actually build this thing for our customer. So it's also therefore a bit about motivation because it comes from purpose. And because it's linked to motivation, it's linked to reward. So value is the reason why we go to work, the reason why we sit down and do anything, the reason why we're productive, the reason why we want to do anything. And it's directly linked to the outcome. So it's the point behind all of this. But there's some challenges with understanding value and its role within Agile. So if that's the value proposition, then how do we evaluate value? Some of the challenges we look at are the fact that value is highly subjective. One person's value is not the same as another person. Value is also volatile in that it can change. A person's perspective on what is valuable at one stage can change to be something different sometime later. And value can also be fragile. What we mean by fragile in that context is that value can be very easily damaged. You can create something of value and then make a relatively minor change to it that completely removes its value or significantly reduces its value. So it's fragile in the sense that, in software terms, an effective working piece of code with some significant bugs in the wrong places can be an utterly useless piece of code or feature or piece of software. So how does traditional project management handle value, or even does value matter to traditional project management? Well, of course it does, but it matters more in the planning phase. In traditional project management, we look at the business case, we look at the project definition, and we try to craft a plan that handles the value, and that plan is a representative of that value. So it tries to say, well, the plan is going to be the boss of delivering value, and everyone involved in the project can take their focus and their thinking away from the value, and they just focus on the activities. They just focus on what they've got to do and how they need to do it and what the limitations are within which they need to get it done. Agile says, well, no, we never lose sight of the value. We're focusing on how we can maximize value. So what that means is that we try to have a more flexible view on how we work within the constraints. So if we're involved in a project after the value decisions have been made, such as in a traditional project, when decisions about how we are going to deliver value are already locked in, then if we're simply part of the team delivering that project, what's our role in delivering value? I mean, do we have a role? Do we see our role as being delivering value, or are we simply delivering part of a plan? And this is one of the challenges and differences in mindset that comes out with people that are part of the team. Now, some of you might think, yeah, but I am Agile. I love Agile. I love value. I'm different. Well, how do we define that difference? And as we talked about last week, once again, it's in the timing of the decisions that contribute to value. So if we put all of our decisions or most of our decisions about value at the very beginning, what we are at risk of is the accuracy and value of the information that we're using to contribute to those decisions. So if we devise a plan that says, well, if we plan to do this, it's going to deliver the right value for the customer will be happy. And what if we're wrong? What if our crystal ball is malfunctioning? It's on the blink. It's not quite giving us the information that we really rely and depend upon. Ergo, what if we're in a more empirical project? How then do we make all our value decisions up front? And this is where the Agile process says, well, we don't. We look to make value-oriented decisions along the way. And sometimes that means we need to be more flexible with the constraints. Hence, we have the phrase value over constraints. So if the plan, when working to a plan in traditional project management, if that doesn't handle value well, then somebody somewhere has a problem. But if we're just part of the team, well, it's not our problem, right? It's not our fault. We just followed the plan. Agile has a very different view. And when we go and talk about the team element in a little while, we'll talk about how and why the attitude and approach to delivering value from each team member is fundamentally different in an Agile methodology as opposed to traditional plan-based methodologies. So if the plan manages the value, what manages the value in Agile? In Agile, there's two components that contribute to managing value. Firstly, it's still the plan, but on a much smaller scale. And what I mean by that is that in Agile, we break the plan down into much smaller segments that we'll talk about in a moment. So through that, the plan or the planning and the preparedness we use is still what we refer to. But the second part of it, the second pillar of delivering value is the people involved. And the people working together in a harmonious and collaborative fashion are able to increase value by recognizing, identifying things that can be done or changes that can be made, adaptation that can be applied that will increase value above what we originally planned for or thought might be the case. So when we're talking about empirical value, we're essentially talking about unknowns. Sometimes we don't know what value we can get. In an empirical project, we're looking at something away down the track that we are trying to guess or estimate what the value might be. So Agile as a methodology is saying that there's just so much we can't know, even though we'd like to, that we have to postpone some of the decisions we make that are going to contribute towards value at the end. Now, some of you might have heard of a chap called Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. I think most recently in 2008, he was the richest guy in the world, considered to be the most successful, by many considered to be the most successful investor of the 20th century. You could probably imagine that someone with more than $50 billion in net worth probably knows a little bit about value. And one of his famous sayings was this one, that price is what you pay and value is what you get. And this duality, this dual perspective is a core difference between how traditional project management often focuses on the price of something throughout the project activity, because the value has already been figured out and decided ahead of time. And so if the value-price relationship gets decided up front, all the effort is on really making sure that price doesn't get out of control, whilst we deliver the value we agreed upon in the very beginning. Agile says, well, let's try and see how we can deliver and maximize value within the budget that has been specified or within the price that has been specified. So it's an exploration to search for value, and that's what we deliver and gave along the way. So I'm just going to check with James in a moment and see if there's any interesting questions that have come out of the content discussions that we've had already, to see if anyone's got any thoughts that we can add. James, have you got anything that we can work with at the moment?
Yeah, there's a couple here, Brenton. First one is, what's the difference between being value-oriented and being customer-oriented?
I would say very little, to be honest, and some of that might become a bit more apparent as we go through our discussion tonight. But the only real judge of value is the customer. So if we're building, and it doesn't matter whether the customer is internal or external, the customer is the one that determines value. So being customer-focused is another way of saying value-focused, because if we're customer-focused and we're aiming for customer satisfaction, then by default we're aiming to deliver value to the customer. So it's a sort of a derivative. We're saying if we're customer-focused, then we have to be value-focused, because that's how we become customer-focused. And if you talk about, salespeople, for example, are going to be familiar with the phrase customer-focused because it's ingrained into the profession. But project people and developers especially are not so familiar with, well, how do I be customer-focused? Well, be value-focused, and that's how. What else have we got, James?
I'll throw it back to you just for now, Brenton. There's maybe one other, but it's a bit off topic, so we'll leave that for the end.
Okay, so one of the questions that I've had come up is about, I've said value is subjective, so why can't it be objective? Well, objectivity is the exclusion of perspective. Now, you could say that if we're relying upon the customer's definition of value, and the customer is the final arbiter of what is value, then their vision or their version of what is value would have to be the final arbiter. So if we say it's objective from that point of view, it's still interpretive. And it's interpretive in the sense that the customer says, well, I value this, this is what I want. And we then have to interpret that in a way that allows us to attempt to deliver it. And that interpretation, any interpretation, by its very nature, is a subjective process. And so when we look at value, we like to look at it as a subjective beast, because that's what warns us to make sure that we are constantly working towards a clear understanding of the particular perspective that a customer will have on value. Let's delve a little bit deeper on how this relates to planning, and I want to dig into some of the myths and truths relating to planning. One of the most popular and most common is something known as an 80-20 rule. Now, it's sometimes a little bit overused, but in simple terms, the 80-20 rule is something that says that for many endeavors, for many elements of business, you'll get 80% of your value or results from 20% of effort. And it's commonly applied, for example, in sales situations, where 80% of revenue comes from only 20% of customers. But also, it can apply in a lot of other production or productivity-oriented functions, where we often say that, well, we get 80% of the value out of 20% of our time or investment or energy, etc. Now, it's a very arbitrary and very broad-based rule. But what it means, in an oversimplified way, is that the effort or activity that yields the most value is often seen as the lesser portion of what we do. So surely if we say, well, we just need to plan better, if we did less of that other stuff that didn't bring value, surely we'd have more time to do the stuff that brought value. And surely that's what project management is all about, right? It's about planning to make sure that we do the right things, the valuable things, the things that we really need to do. So can I just plan ahead and therefore only do the good stuff and yield much more value. But, well, sure, you can do that. But what is the good stuff? What is the value? How are you quantifying, and how clearly and how well and how far in advance can you plan in order to deliver value? How well in advance can you know what that value is? What is it that you do that brings the most value? Or more to the point, perhaps, what is it that you're doing, or that we're all doing now, that we should do less of because it doesn't really contribute to value? So traditional project management says that planning is this mostly ginormous task that happens up front. And we have to keep doing little bits of it along the way. So it's kind of disconnected in time. The planning is disconnected, but we do know that in traditional project management we have to touch on planning, but more in the sense of protecting the integrity of the plan that we created. So planning gets slightly disconnected from the day-to-day process and from the people process on an ongoing basis. Agile takes a different view and says, well, we're going to plan enough to get started, and then we're going to start. And then we're going to plan how we're going to evolve what we've done and what we're going to do with it next. So planning becomes continuous, both in a sense of time and in a sense it's being part of the process, and it's being done by the same people. So planning in Agile is not disconnected from the activity. Planning in this sense is treated as a preliminary process of decision-making. Now, we already spoke last week about the fact that decision-making is rearranged. The timing of decisions is rearranged in an Agile methodology so that we make a lot more of our decisions closer to when we need to make them, or closer to when they're relevant, or closer to when we have information to support them. So technically, or in strict definitions, planning is simply some effort made in preparation for a decision. Now, you can plan a day before, a week before, or a moment or a few seconds before you actually use whatever you create or whatever you bring with that plan. So the simple fact of it preceding the action means that it's classified as planning. So strictly speaking, we don't say that we don't plan or we do less planning. It's more about saying that we plan relevant to what we're about to do in terms of activity. So this is a difference between derived planning versus original planning. Original planning is the stuff that happened at the front, and derived planning is where we say, well, our plans, or what we plan to do next, even if it's moment by moment, is constantly being influenced by the information that we've gained, and our plan is derived from the sum total of everything that has been fed back into it, including the results of what we did last week, last month, and what feedback we got from the customer or anyone else who's helping us assess value. We put that back into our ongoing plan. We have a derived plan from all of that. So if planning can be very small steps in time ahead of when we use it, if it can be very close to the action, then another way of looking at it is that execution is planning, is execution. We're saying we're wrapping these things together. We're saying that we know that anything that we do and think about just prior to the moment of execution constitutes planning. So we're going to do our best planning immediately or close to the period before we actually execute. So we link the two together. Now, what that means is that there's not much value or point in planning for something that you're not going to do for 6 weeks. We're going to plan for what we're going to do next week, or in our next period of time, our next iteration, which we're going to discuss in a little more shortly. So the control that we look for, and the control that we're used to often with traditional project management, that control comes from the fact that we are very close between our planning and our execution, and our planning and our execution. This ongoing tight feedback loop is what gives us our control, because our control comes from the fact that we know precisely what's going on, precisely the results and the value that we did or didn't bring last time. And we know precisely from our up-to-date planning what we can do about it and how we can increase and maximize that value. And that is the nature of control that we get. It's very different from the control in plan-based projects that say control comes from our ability to not change the plan, or our ability to change the plan in very carefully conceived ways, which usually translates to being as little as possible. So it's a different approach to planning, and it's a different approach to control, it's a different approach to execution. Here's a different quote about value, and it's from a slightly different perspective, and it's probably from someone who I suspect doesn't need an introduction. But Einstein said, try not to become a person of success, but rather try to become a person of value. The message behind this is that we're saying that the definition of success is based on the value that something brings. So from that point of view, we're saying that in the project sense, the definition of success of our project, or the definition of success of our contribution to a project, is based around the value that comes out of that, the value that comes out of the project, and the value that comes out of us as contributors to that project. I'll give you an example of derived planning. I plan for a webinar such as this, and I plan for it in advance. But my plan doesn't survive direct contact with the webinar itself. The exact sentences, the words I choose, and exactly how I present these points, it's derived planning. It's based on what's just been said, and it's based on things like the feedback and the comments, etc. as we go. So it's a good example of an agile process where it's still based on contributed information. So James, how are we going with some of our comments and questions?
Yeah, there's plenty more coming through now. I'll start with just a comment that was posted in by Tim Randall that's really good. He says, a great saying I use for planning is, see as far as you can see, and when you get there, you'll be able to see a little further. Just thought that was pretty cool. And then a couple of questions. One question, can a project's value change over its life cycle?
Definitely. And in fact, I would say that this is one of the strengths and features of agile planning, is that you can start with a project that is only expected to yield a moderate value. It might be a small-scale project, and it might evolve and grow and expand into something that delivers significantly higher value. We talk about value as being, how big is it to some extent. You could talk about it as simply being scale. And, value can be defined. If you're talking about software, they might say, a customer might say, look, I just need software that does this couple of things. And we start delivering some of those things, and they discover that, well, actually, this looks really good, and actually, we should get a bit of software. We should expand this to now encompass this, this, and this. So in that sense, absolutely, your value expands. But there's another way in which your value can expand as well, and that is you might still have the same brief, essentially, from the customer. The customer might be saying, well, I still have the same needs to be met. But the original intention might have been to meet it with a certain set of features or a certain outcome. That's the context that we start with. But ultimately, we might find through the process, through innovation, that we have found a remarkably superior or more valuable way of doing it, something that brings the customer a much higher level of value than they were actually looking for. And that's the benefit of the discovery and the exploration elements that come out of this process of constantly feeding back the idea and constantly having a view that we're always not only okay with change, we want change that maximizes and increases value. So, it does depend on exactly what you're building and what you're doing, but certainly the methodology is intentionally providing ample scope to cater for that. It's part of why it's built the way it is.
Cool, thanks. One other here. Are qualified benefits still a subjective value?
If you have a qualified benefit, I'm guessing what the question's about is saying was, if you've got something that's been qualified and something that's been agreed upon and said, okay, well, this is a benefit, this is good, this is value, let's put a stake in the ground and say that we all agree upon that. I think at that stage, if you're talking about it as something that's been delivered and approved, or a feature that's been delivered and approved, you can probably move it out of the subjective category and call it objective. Because objectivity, as we talked before with the other comment we got, the difference between the subjectivity and objectivity of our value is based on the degree of alignment that we can get. And the warning in subjectivity is there to make sure we constantly pursue alignment. And when we have it, if we all can sit around the table with our customer and say, this is a really great feature, it works really well, and it does fantastic things, and we know why it does fantastic things, and we can all agree upon that, then yes, we probably have something that would be fairly objectively considered a good and stable value. I'm hoping that's what the question meant, because that's what I interpreted it to be.
Cool.
One more question, James?
One more. In a typical, yep, in a typical Agile project, what is the % of time one should spend on planning?
Ah, okay. Interestingly, I did some research earlier today trying to find some words of wisdom out there and trying to find the current prevailing wisdom, not specifically with Agile, but in any context of what's a universally accepted degree of time spent on planning. And the reason I found so very little was because of the enormous subjectivity of that sort of perspective and question. And the answer is it depends entirely upon your role. Now, one of the things that we need to think about with Agile is that you certainly still have people whose primary function is about the incremental planning and about the questions that come out of what are we going to do next and how do we do it. Now, there are people whose responsibility, if you're talking, the best example that most people might be familiar with is something like a Scrum Master or a product manager or a product leader, someone who's responsible for making sure these things get sorted out. So those individuals, they will probably spend a much higher percentage of their time involved in planning. And depending on who they are and how much support they get from their team, people will tell you that they might spend 40%, 60%. If they're also part of the technical delivery team, they might be spending less than that on planning. If you look at some of the statistics that were taken from the automobile industry, for example, and I'll throw these statistics out there to help phrase the question. There was a difference, a marked difference, because Toyota, which we'll talk about in a moment when we talk about lean, but Toyota came up with some paradigm shifts that talked about minimizing wastage. And after that, Toyota executives, engineers and management, they were asked what percentage of their time do they spend on delivering value as opposed to things that don't deliver value. And this is a better question because sometimes planning can be seen to be delivering value and sometimes it's not necessarily. And the answer was 80%. So 80% delivering value. When the same thing was asked of contemporary car makers in the US at the time, the answer for the same echelon of senior personnel was that they spend around 20% of their time delivering value. So I know that doesn't directly answer the question, and the simple answer is that it really depends entirely upon your role and function. But one of the differences with Agile is what you don't have is that you don't have that many people or that many situations where people are spending no time on planning. You really have a lot less of the minions that are just there doing their task and looking at what's next on their checklist so they can work on that. Everybody has a role to play in contributing to effective planning. And the discussions, whether they be meetings or however they're handled, the workshop environments that occur on a regular recurring basis mean that everyone has some contribution to planning. Now, in those situations, you might spend a day or half a day out of a 2-week iteration on planning. So, depending on how many hours, someone spending half a day on discussing what they did for the last 2 weeks and what they're going to do for the next 2 weeks might be considered a small amount of time. But then the idea is to give them enough information for them to get back to the nose to the grind wheel and get on with working it and building it. So we've talked a little bit. I want to go into something about iterations because we've kind of touched on it, and some of these questions have very nicely given us some thought and some curiosity about what am I talking about with iterations, because iteration is a core concept in Agile. So I want to dig a little bit deeper and try to put a bit more of a frame around what we mean with iteration. Now, I want to first highlight something about the difference between concurrent versus serial development, because I'm talking about the actual work here. I'm talking about the activity to create stuff. Now, serial, by its definition, means things that come one after the other. So one thing finishes, the next thing begins. And this is much more synonymous with traditional project management, where you have a sequence, and it's what the wonderful Gantt chart will show us. Things lining up. You have things that precede others. You have dependencies, etc. Now, concurrent development is a little bit different. Concurrent is talking about things that happen simultaneously and things that happen in a parallel fashion. So we talk about iteration. Means iteration as a definition means repeating something or repeating activities in order to refine or improve upon or to meet a goal or an objective. So an iteration is something that you'll do over, not repeat. It's not a repetition. A repetition is something that you might bring out of a manufacturing environment where you're doing the same thing over and over again. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about an iteration where you will review and revisit and go over and improve and enhance. And you'll do that a number of times until there is sufficient satisfaction in the value of what's been created that it can be now left and moved on. That's very different from what happens in a traditional project management, where things are, in essence, they're attempted to be done right the first time. And a lot of the effort goes into not having to do it again and improve it and fix it later. So work in traditional project management, it typically happens once and then it's done. So the serial, the waterfall, the traditional project management is sort of this linear process. But in Agile, we look at iterations or iterative developments with these 4 key attributes that we see here, which I want to go through in a little bit more detail for each one. Firstly, iterative basically means that we build part of something, or we start something. We get something there that we can look at and work upon, and then we revise it again and again and again. And that's, each revision is the iteration. When we say feature-based, it means that if we're going to build something that we then improve upon, if we're going to have something to say, okay, here's a thing and it's not quite right, now let's go to iteration number 2 and fix a few things and make it a bit better. To do that, we need to be able to measure the value in what we've created in the first instance. So that thing, that feature that we've created in the beginning, it's got to be complete enough to be testable, to be measurable by the customer as being good, bad, or not. Without that ability to assess and measure, we can't put effective constructive feedback back into our iteration process to really make use of it and then improve upon it next time. If we built half of something that doesn't quite work, imagine you've got half a piece of software and you just can't really demonstrate a feature out of it. It's very hard for a customer to decide whether or not you've created anything of value and what you need to do to increase its value, other than, well, finish it so that that bit works, and then I can tell you how good it is. So that's what we mean by feature-based. It's not about putting some code out there or some components or some pieces. It's about something you can put a box around or put a label on or a shrink wrap and say, that's that thing. Time-boxed is about the period of effort or the period of time. It's about putting a box around a degree of effort, usually measured in time, and it lets us create a definitive period within which we can create something that has a feature. Now, the important thing about time boxing is that as we get to the end of a boxed period of time, we then are forced to then think about the next episode, the next iteration. So our time box needs to be long enough for us to be able to reliably create something that we'll call a feature, a finished thing that we can then improve upon. But it's got to be short enough that we can have enough iterations through the life of the project that we can refine it to a point of adequacy, or obviously perfection, if that's what we're after. Now, incremental in this context, it means that we can deploy something in pieces. It means that we want interconnected features that work together to achieve something of value, and we allow it to increase its value by adding more features to it. It means working output, and in the software case it means working software. It doesn't mean we build half a dozen features, none of which quite work right, and we're still working on it. And at the end, we hope at the delivery and handover that all the features are going to work fine. That's different. Agile does it by saying, no, this feature set, we're going to iterate that until we're done, until we're moved on, and we're going to have different, perhaps have different teams, different people working on different features. So there's our concurrency, where different things are happening along the way, but each one is iterating and improving it as they go. So this is a fairly important feature of Agile project management. And we generally look at short time boxes because we need them to be short enough to create that feedback loop that we can benefit from it. So it's not just about iterations themselves. It's about the value that we can bring or give to the customer at the end of each iteration, the value that the features bring. So it's not really about the tasks. Tasks might be disconnected from the outcome. It's about the finished features, and the tasks only matter, the tasks are only important if they contribute to the completion of a feature. A task that has nothing to do with the features that we're intending to release at the end of our time box, those tasks don't belong in that time box. They don't even belong in our plan, they don't belong in our thoughts, as a general rule. So we facilitate the feedback loop by having this endless cycle. And the value that we create manifests in a way that the client can understand and assess it through this. Then they can give us meaningful feedback on something that they can relate to because they can see and identify it. So it's really much about the value. It's not about the constraints and it's not about the tasks. So time boxes then are about the decisions. The iteration is about the decisions. And this is something we touched on in week 1. It's the decisions that really rock in this situation. This is the important stuff. And Agile is all about the ability to make the best, most informed, most impactful, most fruitful decisions we can make to constantly enhance the value that we deliver. So a good test of Agile versus traditional project management and its suitability for different projects is that when traditional project management reaches its final stage and we discover perhaps far too many things that aren't right, they're not complete, they don't work, they're not finished, they're perhaps misinterpreted, etc., we need to look at corrective procedures or auditing procedures to prevent them and corrective procedures to fix them. Agile tackles this problem very differently by saying that we know all this is going to happen and we're going to fix them by doing it each and every time box that we go through. How are we going, James? Any interesting good questions that we can pick out and have a chat about for a moment?
Yep. Here's one. If best planning comes as close as possible to execution, how do you get the budget for resources you need, such as people and equipment?
Usually with Agile, that's going to be one of your starting points. And you do have to have a degree of initial high-level planning. You have to have an initial conceptual understanding of how much work you are expecting to commit and how much resource you're expecting to have available. But when you come down to specifics, that's when the flexibility arises. And the strengths come out of this by saying, well, you know, we've got a budget of $1 million and that's going to let us have X man hours of work and we're going to have X amount of technology resources available and we're going to be able to do this. So when the customer says, well, I need a piece of software that will do this, 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 and this. Now, sometimes with the strength of our experience, we will lean on that and say, look, you know, that's a $2 million requirement, what you've got there. Or sometimes we'll say, well, yeah, okay, we can do that. That's doable within that budget, but we're going to have some variations. We need to find out what's most crucial for you, what are the hot buttons, what's key, and what's less important. And we'll start with the things that are most important, and we'll refine and iterate those, and we'll get to a point, and we'll have the milestone discussions you have is about often the strategic accomplishments of value. How far have you got through the project, and how many of the expected features have we delivered within the time and budget that we've used up so far? But quite often, our agility, our agile process is where we say, well, hang on, we've already used up 50% of time and budget at a certain point, and we've only just getting to the, you know, knocking off some of the crucial features. We're now going to have to use our agile processes to think that maybe some of these other features that we were planning to put in need to be done differently. They need to be scaled down. We need to look for fewer iterations. Maybe we need to explain to the customer or help the customer understand that by perhaps seeking the highest level of quality and requiring additional iterations to constantly refine and tweak, they may be using up budget unwisely. They may be using up iterations unwisely. These factors are still in play. We need to still work with the customer at a strategic decision level to make sure that on the scale of the whole budget, it's not going into the wrong features that are delivering the wrong value. So the value question happens at two levels. I've just talked about it at a feature level, and I've talked about the feature feedback coming back and the value discussion about how do we improve that feature. But there's another value equation that happens at a different, more strategic level, and that is how much value are we delivering with our accumulated features so far. And it's something in Agile, we never lose sight of it, we're constantly looking at it, but it's a different kind of discussion. It's the kind of discussion that you have with customer and sort of product supervisor or director, etc., and at that high level to work out which way to go. So hopefully that adds some value to that to that question. James, we've got any others that we can have a chat about?
Yep. How can we measure the features after each iteration?
Really, only the customer can. Now, sometimes we will have a fairly good idea, and it will depend upon the degree of interpretation and how much certainty we have and how much accuracy and how correct we are with what we believe the customer wants. But the only one that really matters is the customer's response to it. So we might measure a feature and say, yeah, that looks right. That ticks the box. That meets the written requirements or the recorded discussion from our last meeting. That does, and then the client is the only one who can either agree with that or not. Now, obviously, if you have a client that's constantly disagreeing, then you might have a communication problem with how their requirements are being recorded at the various iteration meetings. But because the customer is integrally involved in these regular iteration meetings, the customer is the best person. Now, if you say, well, how do we measure it before we sit down with the customer and say, well, we think we've got this right? That comes down to our ability to understand and interpret what the customer is saying. Now, in the very beginning of a project, you could understand that there'd be a little flexibility in that. There might be some experience needed in interpreting how and what the customer wants, and in the customer getting to know how we interpret it. So that sort of communication relationship does have to evolve and typically does get better, but it's only going to get better if we work on improving that dialogue and that communication channel so that we remove as much ambiguity from those conversations as we can. As we start to remove those ambiguities and get the customer deeply involved in what we're doing and how we express and understand things, then we will have a much better idea of being able to estimate ourselves that when we get to the end of a time box, we think we've got a pretty good idea of how the customer is going to react to what we've created and how that feature looks and what value it brings. But don't expect or demand that you're going to know that right off the bat. And to some extent, trying to put too much process in place to make sure that from the very first time box you've got an ironclad understanding of what the customer wants. That touches on sort of the traditional thinking that says, no, let's get it right the first time. That's not the idea. We are learning through this process, and we need to embrace the learning. And sometimes that means embrace the learning of how our customer thinks. One more question, James, if you've got one.
Yep. If you only plan enough to get started, how do you know if you're proceeding down the right path? How do you avoid getting led down the wrong path?
Well, I'll give you an honest answer to that question. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes that happens because the customer doesn't know they're on the wrong path. If we think about, we're not really expecting to be deliberately led down the wrong path. That's not really, I guess, the question that's being asked. But down the wrong path, it comes down to the question of how and when that path is deemed to be wrong and what is wrong with it. Because part of the acceptance of an empirical project is two-way. It's the customer as well accepting and understanding that, yes, we might start off on the wrong path. And that's kind of okay if we can detect that and work together to get things on the right path. And it's not about blame or recrimination or whose fault was it, because that's what happens more often in the plan-based project management. Because if you get partway through a plan and it's the wrong plan, you're really up that creek. So in Agile, we try to say, well, we know that there's going to be some experimental, exploratory, uncertain elements. And yes, sometimes we go down a particular development path and we make a certain amount of investment. And that acceptance must be mutual. It's not a case of the client or the customer saying to us, oh, well, look, you went down the wrong path, so I'm not going to pay you for all that work and effort. That's not the relationship that we start off with. And that comes from them understanding the empirical nature of what's going on and them understanding that their deep involvement with this process is their best way of not avoiding that kind of wastage, but minimizing it and mitigating it so that as much as possible they are clear about wrong corrections and they can fix it and get everyone back on track. But it's not about a contractual obligation of whose fault that is or who should be paying for it. That's an investment. Going down the path to the point where you figure out that it's not the right path, that's an investment of exploration and research that you've done, and you've done it together. So it should be something that we embrace, take the best out of, and move forward. So hopefully that answers the question there of what do you do when you find you're going in the wrong direction. I mean, in some ways, that's the whole point of being agile enough to correct and fix that. Admittedly, things don't always work to plan. We're talking about how we should be handling it, but obviously there are situations where communication doesn't work out, the methodology we're working with doesn't work. Sometimes the team members aren't all lined up, and it ends up a little bit more messy than we'd like. That actually brings us, interestingly, to a good discussion about excellence. Because I want to talk a little bit about what we mean and the importance of excellence and how it's a little bit different in Agile compared to traditional project management. Now, that's not to say that Agile is different in that we do or don't expect people to do a good job. It's a little bit different to that. We're talking about value, and only excellence delivers value, which means that average, mediocre, or a bit relaxed isn't necessarily delivering value. If we're talking about value, then team excellence and individual excellence are necessary contributors to that. Now, in traditional project management, there is a larger opportunity in most cases for mediocrity to sneak through, because as long as it meets the plan, it's good enough, right? As long as it meets the specifications, as long as it's good enough, then I've met the plan objectives. Why try harder, right? However, in Agile, the thinking is there's always a reason to try harder. There's always a reason to do better, to learn how to do better, to expand. There's always this hungry pursuit of doing it better, of delivering more value. And so this promotes the thinking and the idea that excellence should be a natural part of what we pursue every day. So Agile, therefore, it strives for excellence, because without that, we don't really deliver value. I mean, there's no point submitting poor work to a customer for review at the end of a time box when really you could and should have done better. Generally, all they will say to us is, well, go back and fix it, make sure it kind of works, and then maybe we can give you some other useful feedback about what you should focus on. So Agile intrinsically needs high quality in the work done. And the regular transparency that Agile has from this frequent iteration process and this feedback loop, it makes it a lot easier to maintain high quality than it typically is in traditional project management. In traditional project management, we use things like quality audits and a range of sort of correctional processes to ensure excellence, or to not so much ensure excellence, but to avoid the lack of excellence, to avoid failure and weakness. That's more often the emphasis. It's looking for the things that aren't good enough. So sending, for example, giving a customer a bug-ridden set of features and trying to get them to tell you how it works, that's not Agile. That's just lazy. Okay, so being Agile is meaning a commitment to excellence in what we do and what we deliver at the end of any iteration. And this is why teams that are new to Agile get a bit excited and occasionally bite off more than they can chew. And it's a lesson that some people need to learn the hard way. But it's important in project management in Agile to make sure that we don't settle for this subpar average performance. We want to manage the planning of what goes on in any time box to make sure that it is delivered or deliverable to an excellent standard. Now, sometimes traditional project management is criticized for focusing more on administrative excellence and less on technical excellence. So some of the processes and methods inside traditional project management are saying, well, let's get our project management perfect. Let's get our management and our administration of everything that's going on. Let's get that perfect, and we'll just then hope that that makes sure that the technical outcome is perfect. But the evidence is only measured against a predetermined set of criteria inside the plan. And that's often several steps removed from the actual or current customer needs. So in a plan-based environment, we are at the mercy of the drifting gap between what was deemed acceptable and what is now desired by the time we do a handover and delivery. So the pursuit of excellence, it needs to live inside each of us. It must be something that we want to be excellent and we want to strive within ourselves to deliver excellence. But excellence can't be delivered by an enforcement of a process. You can't generally get people to function at their best by coercion. When we try to, we get poor mixed with the acceptable. And we expend more effort correcting things and fixing things so that they end up simply meeting the specifications or meeting expectations. And that's a lot of what tends to happen in the traditional project environment. So this is why we say that excellence begins within us, why the people and their views on excellence in Agile really matter a lot. Now, in traditional project management, we often have this expectation that the excellence in design is enough, that an excellent design, which is a separate function, a preceding function, if that works, then we know that we have something really good that we can build. But if we don't get excellence in design, it doesn't matter how excellent our delivery might be, and we already know it's not going to be excellent, it's probably going to be good enough, but if the design is already out of date and no longer excellent, then we may have just spent a whole lot of excellent effort building something that isn't necessarily worth very much. That's the challenge that we encounter with traditional project management. Now, in traditional project management, if we know that there's no way that the expectations are going to shift and change over the life of the project, then that's why we use traditional project management. But why is it separate? I mean, why do we do all the design up front? Well, if we're building a bridge, we kind of have to. We kind of have to know how the pylons are going to build before we put the stuff on top. But a lot of projects, and the projects that lend themselves to Agile, we need some amount of concept or conceptions for the context. And in Agile, we design only a structure. We design that high-level vision of rough terms, what we're going to do, how we're going to go about it, what are the resources needed, and roughly how long might it take. And then we design the components as and when we choose to focus on those components or those features or those elements of the project that we're trying to deliver. And we make sure that our concerted effort is narrow as we go through it. James, got time for one quick question before we've still got a few more slides to get through. We've got about half an hour left. Have you got a good question that we can throw up at the moment?
One question. Agile principles seem to demand excellent personnel to arrive at excellence. Can average developers be used to deliver using Agile for excellence?
The simple answer I would give is yes, but there are two ways in which I would answer that yes. Firstly, I would say that in my experience, average developers that are new or become introduced to a effective Agile environment, not a dysfunctional Agile environment, but a highly effective and functional Agile environment, they tend to become better developers. So the average go up a notch is my experience. And obviously that's a generic, broad sweeping statement. There are a few that don't. But in my experience, there is this general upward trend of motivation towards ability and therefore ability and desire for excellence. So the other thing is in how you mix the team, because you're generally not going to have a team where everyone is the same level of average mediocrity. You're generally going to have people that are more excellent, more focused on excellence, and strive a bit harder, etc. And how you structure the teams, how you allocate and put people together, how you can have energetic, motivated, and people that believe in excellence mixed in with people that are still quite not too sure about this work harder thing, you will often find that that motivation will be contagious, that interest in excellence will be contagious as the rewards are recognized. And because it's a very team-focused event within Agile, the team gets recognized for the success. And yes, occasionally you will have those people that are just happy to cruise by and do a very good job of working, pretending they're working very hard. usually the more extreme examples of that thinking will not continue to function or survive in Agile environments. And when you don't have any choice, when you have some duds that are just you're stuck with and they're in the team, usually they will be relegated to less intense, less demanding, less critical. They will be on the periphery of teams. You know, there are going to be people in some organizations that tend to carry more weight than others or less. And it's more in how we structure. If we just can't get the motivation happening, we can't bring the results and bring people up to the next standard, then sometimes we have to protect us and the rest of the team from some of the damage. And I mean, ultimately, the final verdict, of course, is people shouldn't belong in some of those teams. Some people aren't cut out for it. But we don't always have those sorts of options available to us by deciding who's in and who's out. Sometimes we have to work with what we've got. And yes, I have seen some teams that have really struggled because they've tried to work with a group of people who just generally aren't very motivated, or they're motivated primarily at doing as little as possible. I mean, I spoke at length with one chap about in that very situation, and at the end, the only option for that person was to move themselves, for them to move to another situation or organization because they were unable to change it to a happy environment. That's sort of an extreme situation. Let's have a chat about lean. Kind of teased you with this earlier, and some of you have probably heard about lean, and it's going to be on the list of a methodology of Agile, but it's kind of in its own little category, and I want to just touch on a little bit about it. Lean, strictly speaking, is about the removal of waste. Now, it came from back in the 1980s. Toyota came up with some ideas on removing waste in the manufacturing processes. Now, the idea of wasting less is not a new one. You know, we didn't suddenly discover that waste was a bad thing, and we didn't suddenly discover that waste was there. But what was new was that they systemized the reduction of waste. Previously, reducing waste or wasteful things had been much more of an ad hoc event, an ad hoc responsibility within manufacturing. And what they did is they systemized that responsibility and made it from a subconscious objective to a conscious objective. So waste is measured against value. And if something doesn't contribute either directly or indirectly to value, then it might fall in the category of waste. But waste is a fairly broad sweeping term. So what they did is they needed to come up with some definitions of how we quantify and how we measure what waste is. And some of the first things you jump on are things like overheads. A lot of organizations, a lot of departments, a lot of teams, a lot of procedures, they have overheads. And overheads we often talk about as being bureaucratic, bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, management for the sake of management. You know, many of us have driven down the road, and we've seen the road maintenance crew with 3 people standing around with polo shirts and a whistle, and one poor chap in the trench digging. So we can understand that these sorts of overheads occur in certain situations in certain organizations. But you also look at overheads or wastage in the sense of process, and it's the maintenance of process and organizational structures, the over-planning. When you have productivity and wastage in productivity, if you have 2 people building something and you only need 1, well, they both build it and you've got 2. It's pretty easy to see that you've doubled your work and you've doubled your effort, because now you've got an extra one and there's this question, where's this going to go? What are we going to do with it? Right? But when 2 managers do the same plan, there is not the same degree of awareness that you've just wasted one manager's time and effort. And so what lean thinking does is it tries to place a value and measure and assess the intrinsic value or the contribution to value of everything that happens. And the emphasis is on adding value to what we do and being able to see the connection between what we're doing and the value that it's bringing. And obviously this is like avoiding redundant work and redundant activity. So lean kind of sneaks into the Agile concept because it's part of the value discussion. Lean is something that is intended to maximize value, to promote value, to preserve and protect the integrity of value. And in that sense, it lines up with a lot of the other things that Agile are talking about, such as the maximization of value through the delivery of any kind of project or the development of something or the creation of something. So whilst Lean was originally invented as a manufacturing process, not the development of something, it's been used more and more as a morphed way of thinking into how can we make sure that not just that we are delivering value, but that we're not doing the stuff that doesn't contribute to value. So those of you that are familiar with traditional project management, ask yourself, with what you've seen in your experience, how much overhead sometimes exists in traditional project management. Now, that might not be in your case. You might be horribly understaffed and under-resourced in your project management, but often you have a lot of overhead, a lot of managing of the plan and managing of the process. It can be just as big as managing the productivity and the output and the work. So Lean has moved its way into some of the project management thinking. And when we do take away some of these overheads, or we take away and reduce some of the bureaucracy, we sometimes take away some of the things that we previously relied upon for certainty. We take away some of our safeguards, some of our safety nets, because this is where a lot of these overheads, these bureaucratic processes, were often introduced to try and give us a sense of safety, that we can relax, that this process will protect and make sure that we're not exposed to this, that, or the other bad things. When we start to trim that down, we then sometimes feel a little bit vulnerable. So what are we safeguarding ourselves from? And usually the answer is related to or stems from a degree of ignorance. It's protecting us from what certain people don't know or what they weren't taught. And we got used to thinking that they didn't need to know it. And so by accepting the devaluing of the knowledge and awareness of the people involved, we supplemented and replaced that in a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations and a lot of methodology with process, bureaucratic overhead. Now, there are still situations where it is more useful than others. But in Agile, we are looking for and talking about those situations where we know we can cut back, where we know we can use and work with people that approach things differently, that we can have educated, that we can have motivated, enthused, and can handle what we need to do. So we say that waste is whatever doesn't deliver value. But because that's a simplistic phrase, we need an assessment at a granular level. We need team members who can think for themselves about what's wastage or might be and what's not. We need people that are sufficiently aware of what the value is that we are trying to deliver so that they can accurately and spontaneously recognize things that might not contribute to that value. And additionally, we have them so focused and interested in delivering value that they want to do something about the things that they uncover that don't necessarily contribute to value. So the relationship between overhead versus planning versus waste. I mean, planning, we've already talked at length. We need to have a certain amount of planning. We have talked about the rearranging of its timeframes. But overhead is planning to an excess. It's investment in planning that's more than what we need or not when we need it. So, for example, if you were to plan in detail something that's a piece of work that you're going to do in 3 months' time, odds are you're going to have to spend an amount of time revisiting and revising that plan before you actually begin that piece of work. So some, perhaps large portion of the effort gone into planning that twice could be waste. So sometimes the complexity that has been introduced through bureaucratic process-oriented systems is not so much for the sake of the complexity, but it's complexity to cover complexity. So it becomes a little bit self-propagating. Because you have more complexity created by the bureaucracy needed to manage something that was already complex, then you introduce something else, you need even more complexity to get around that. Going in the other direction, we are trying to reduce the complexity at its root cause. And this is also part of why we empower the people. And some people object to this. Some people say, no, but it is complex. we can't avoid it being complex. You can't simplify it any more than we already have. You know, it's just that difficult. Well, usually you can get a lot more done in terms of delivering a value with empowered, capable, motivated, competent people than you can get done with empowered, capable, competent procedures. Because not many would put all those things in the same sentence as the word procedure. We don't normally find capable, competent, empowered procedures. So we don't necessarily need the complexity that the bureaucracy brings, but we need other elements of the value that it brings. We need to still be able to have the safeguards, but met by other means, met by an awareness and an understanding that the people involved are engaged and sufficiently aware of what needs to be done, that they can make good empowered decisions and collective decisions as a team that mean that they can still bring out value and good results. So this is where we say that Agile talks about teams over tasks. Now, before we have a bit of a chat about teams, James, have you got a question or two that we can pick up and grab?
Yep, a couple here. How does Agile and its value focus marry with good risk management?
That's a good question. I think the best answer I could give for that is that they are intrinsically entwined. And one of the ways in which, one of the reasons why we take on Agile the way we do is because we say that the risk is unpredictable and unsurmountable. So Agile is at its best when risks are at their highest. And so risk management in traditional means that we're not able to be flexible enough. We have to do our best to think of all the possible risks in advance and come up with mitigation strategies and often a separate mitigation budget or avoidance budget to deal with risk. Agile says, well, we know that the risk's going to happen. We're going to face them every single day and absolutely going to face them every single iteration. And so our risk management strategy is to be flexible enough to look at the actual events and look at the up-to-date assessment of our risks and what is likely to happen and react accordingly as we go. Now, you could take a risk from any direction. You could take a risk from, say, let's look at the market or the competition. And you're happily building something for a customer, and the customer comes along and says, oh my goodness, our competitors have just launched their thing. It looks just like ours, and they launched it last week. What on earth are we going to do? Well, now, in a traditional project management, that might have been a risk that you had to take into account. I mean, what would you do? How would you manage that in a plan-based project? A tough thing to deal with. But in an Agile project, you could turn around and say, well, okay, if it's exactly the same, let's have a look at it. Let's see how it is. Let's find out how we can change what we're doing to give you, the customer, different differentiators so that you can approach the market and compete with them on some effective basis, rather than us just carry on producing what we were always going to produce that might end up actually being inferior. So Agile project management is risk management in a sense. It is an ongoing, responsive, reactive process that says that it doesn't matter what the risk is. Yeah, we'll think about it, we'll plan it, we'll thought it out, but we're not going to answer every question pertaining to risk. We're going to keep an eye out and a lookout for them, and we're going to deal with them as the information comes to hand. So let's move on a little, because I think we're a tad behind our schedule tonight, so we're going to kick on a little bit faster with a couple of these points. We will hang in there at the end for more questions, so keep them coming. Don't feel disheartened if we haven't covered your question yet. We will allocate some more question time at the end of it. Now, I have already talked a bit about teams and about people, and teams, as Kelsey mentioned last week, the team is accountable. Teams are interdependent because the people in it are dependent upon each other, and they're jointly accountable. The people in the team are all jointly accountable for the results and the deliverables and the value that each team creates. Now, this raises a point that's already been mentioned and touched on before. What happens when you do have disruptive elements in the team? And I mean, my personal view, I tend to be somewhat draconian about these sorts of things. I tend to be inclined to act fast and act swiftly to deal with them. And I believe that every member of a team deserves a reasonable good opportunity to evolve themselves into the kind of component and contributor that their team needs. But there's also a point at which the team dynamics, the team output and value can greatly suffer if we let damaging situations continue for too long. Because the team needs to make decisions together. And I've talked about all of the empowerment and all of the intelligent contributions that we want our team members to make. Well, one of the most important things they have to do is make really key decisions. Especially have to make them at the end of each iteration about what do we do, how we do it, and how are we going to do it next. So in the middle of an iteration, when they're partway through a time box or, for example, a sprint, as Scrum would call it, then they need to make decisions because they are not going to have an impromptu planning meeting around things. They're going to work harmoniously as a team, bounce ideas off each other, and decide how they're going to deal with even the minutest of challenges as a team. So there's two advantages with this from Agile. One is that, as I mentioned before, Agile methods bring a higher level of input, a sense of ownership, a sense of self-direction and satisfaction to the team members, which means, on average, a higher potential motivation. And the other thing is that people who are persistently resistant to the attitude requirements of Agile either shouldn't be there or shouldn't be depended upon as key elements of the team. So because we discussed that Agile has got ongoing planning, design, review, it has many ongoing decisions, and those decisions need to be collaborative. So collaborative is meaning that everyone must contribute value to the decision itself. So if teams are the root of our resources, then they need to be able to collaborate in order to deliver value. If you have people that are working in parallel and not collaboratively, then what they do, if it does depend upon each other, the less they communicate and the less they collaborate, the greater the risk that they won't be able to have harmonious features delivered at the end of the time box period. And this is one of the things that gets talked about in a couple of books and studies where they talk about environments, and they talk about physical environments, and they talk about the fact that Agile teams do benefit the most from being in a face-to-face physical environment together. The element of fuzzy logic is a term that's used to describe the little tiny decisions that need to be made. So I've already talked a bit, and we've looked at the bigger decisions that get made at the iteration phase. We take the big feedback from the customer, we feed it back into what we're doing. But each and every day, each and every hour, each and every minute, there are little tiny decisions that need to get made. There's always degrees of vague, there's degrees of uncertainty, and there's degrees of risk with any of those decisions. And this is what we call fuzzy logic. We need the team members to apply the best logic they can in situations where there's always some tiny percentage or even major percentage of the data they would want to rely upon is uncertain or fuzzy. So fuzzy logic is an inherent challenge of how we go through all of this. So the team decisions, there's three elements to team decisions that I want to talk about. There's a difference between compromise and reconceiving. So what do I mean by this? When we compromise, we say, well, you have that view and you have that view, and we're going to take a view that's halfway in between, and we'll accept that. Typically in a compromise, the opportunity is that both sides of that equation feel like they've lost, they've missed out on something. The purpose of reconceiving is it says, well, let's take your ideas and let's take your ideas and let's create something new that they both contribute to and reconceive both perspectives into something different. So reconceiving as a process of decision-making and collaboration ends up bringing a greater alignment and context for what we're doing. So what we're trying to promote here is clever interactions, not just clever people. It's not just about let's have some smart people in our team because like smart people are good, right? And they're really helpful and handy in Agile. No, it's about the clever interactions. And this is one of the reasons why there's an encouragement for having Agile teams in physical proximity. And yes, we know that we often have distributed teams and we just can't do that. But if we can't do that, we want to try and facilitate and create situations and environments where people can feel like there's clever interactions between each other, because it's those clever interactions that are the gold. That's where the innovations come from. That's where ideas are bounced around and some spectacular positive results can come out of these sorts of things. But when we talk about team members, the customer is a part of the team in Agile thinking. So, we often see them as the last team member. They are part of what we're doing, and some Agile projects have the customer involved on a daily basis. Now, we obviously only have major planning discussions at the end of any iteration, or at the end of a time box, or sprint, as you call it. So that's when you have a much more engaged planning decision-making process. But there's certainly, in many projects, there's ample room for the customer to have communication and clever interactions with our team members on an ongoing basis. So another way of looking at this is to say that in an Agile thinking, the team is the project. It's not something we can separate to the same extent as we can in other situations. Because what we're trying to do, and this is something that I'm sure has sort of come across already, we are adapting in Agile. So if the value of what we're trying to create needs to evolve, so must the work that we're doing. It must evolve as well. And if change, therefore, is the purpose of an Agile method, then the value is not the enemy or it's not the problem. Change is not what we're up against. Change is not the problem. Change is what we're here to do. And adaptation is a part of our process. It's not the exception to the process. It's not the ugly thing called a change request that most people tend to shudder at in traditional project management when they hear and think about. So adaptation is change for good. It is evolution. It is the improvement via adjustment. It's a core function of what we're here to do in Agile. We embrace it, we accept it. So this raises the question, and here's a phrase that some of you might have come across. Do we follow this mantra, plan the work and then work the plan? This is a phrase that's evolved from traditional project management. Does this apply in Agile? Well, yes, it does. But the plan might only be 2 weeks long. You plan the work that you're going to do for your next iteration. And then you work that plan. And to the exclusion of all else, it's heads down. You're inside an iteration. You've got your plan of what you're going to do. It's a small period of time. You can afford to butt out all other distractions and interruptions and get on with building this thing, this feature, this outcome that you're going to create at the end of your iteration. You work that plan. And at the end of the iteration, you evolve and revise your plan. So the phrase chaotic is a phrase that's thrown out there to try and talk about the fact that we try to sit on this balance between chaos and order. It's a way of saying that there's this finely tuned thing in between too much flexibility and enough flexibility to adapt. Now, before we wrap up tonight, and when I say wrap up, at the end of this we will have plenty of time for a bunch more questions in about 5 minutes. But I want to try to bring your minds back to 2 official documents. So tapping into everything that we've covered tonight, tapping into what you might have already read or perhaps listened to with the pre-recorded lectures. Let's talk about something called the Agile Manifesto. Now, this is a set of stated principles that were originally conceived, and you'll notice, and when we look through this, there'll be a definite software feel, because this is how this originated. The Agile Manifesto was a statement of principles created to sort of say, well, here is the code of conduct that we live by in Agile thinking. So I'm going to run through them and see how, if you can see how they match up with some of the things that we've already talked about. The first one, it says our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Again, there's that value word. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer, that is, deliver them value through early and continuous delivery. So they're constantly getting stuff they can use and they can feel satisfied about. And that we welcome change. We welcome changing requirements. We welcome the customer saying, no, I don't want that anymore. I want this instead, even late in the development. Because Agile is saying that change is good. When the customer realizes that something else is going to give them more value, who are we to say that they can't have that? No, we're the ones to say that, yeah, let's do that instead. Let's give you the value that's going to give you a competitive advantage. So we deliver working software frequently. And you can replace software with a lot of other things in this context. And we talk about a couple of weeks to a couple of months. There's your time boxes. There's your periods of time. And yes, it's flexible, depending on what you're doing. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it is months. But your time boxes, you deliver stuff that's useful. But you do prefer the shorter time scale, as short as is practical, because that gives you the best feedback loop. We then say that business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is where we're saying that value is value to the business. The customer is there to run a business. Their perspective is business. Their value is business. We might be building software or something else, but the value is in its value to the business. And that translation of value, which was talked about in the pre-recorded audio, that translation of value means that the business people must have ongoing and fruitful communication with the developers. We say we build projects around motivated individuals. We give them the environment and support that they need, and we trust them to get the job done. Motivated individuals. This is something we've touched on a fair bit. The power to the people, as it were. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This is something we only just finished talking about a few moments ago. It's the fact that we recognize that clever interactions are best done in real time and face-to-face. Yes, sometimes we can't, but that's where it works the best. We say that the working software is the primary measure of progress. We're not ticking off steps in a process, in a Gantt chart, activities in a plan. Working software, value, that's all that really counts. We say Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. I spoke to a friend of mine who was doing an Agile project, and I said, how close to completion are you? He said, oh, we'll be finished when the customer stops giving us money. Well, how far are you through the project? Well, we've already done 150% of the original brief. And the customer's enjoying the value so much out of what we're doing that we're probably going to end up delivering double what they originally asked for before they think they've got enough. That's what Agile can do. Could you imagine that kind of conversation in a traditional project management? Oh, we're 50% over the budget, we're loving it, and so is the customer. Not quite the same thing. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. Technical excellence. Do good work. Encourage good work. Promote good work. Good design. And because design happens every step of the way, and we're constantly refining and improving it, we talked about excellence as we covered that tonight. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. That's the lean component. Make sure we're not doing the things we shouldn't be doing. And the best architectures, requirements, designs emerge from self-organizing teams. That's the innovation. That was covered in a little more detail in the pre-recorded audio. Emergence and innovation come out of team dynamics, self-organized teams. Not the same as self-led teams, that's a different thing. And at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. That's the iteration. That's where we constantly reflect on how we're going about this. Not just what we're building, but how we're building it. Now, the last slide we have tonight is a very similar and shorter document, is something called the Declaration of Interdependence. It has a very similar purpose to the Agile Manifesto. And you'll probably recognize a lot of similarities, and you'll probably, again, recognize a number of things that we've already covered. And hopefully, through what we've covered, will make a lot more sense. So point 1 in the Declaration of Interdependence says that we increase return on investment by making continuous flow of value our focus. So return on investment. to the customer. The customer's paying us. We are giving returns that they value, and we are continuously focusing on how we can flow that value back to them. We're not waiting for everything to finish before we give them anything of value. We say we deliver reliable results by engaging customers in frequent interactions and shared ownership, feedback loops. Customers part of the team. The results are reliable because they've been integrally involved in helping shape it at appropriate points along the way. And they've taken a sense of ownership in helping make sure it is right, not just waiting until it's all done and hope it's okay. We say we expect uncertainty. We manage for it through iterations, anticipation, and adaptation. Uncertainty is our job. It's what we're here to do. It's what we're here to deal with. We say we unleash creativity and innovation by recognizing that individuals are the ultimate source of value and creating an environment where they can make a difference. It's the power of the people. It's empowering people to be at their best, not only be as good as the plan needs them to be. We say we boost performance through group accountability for results and shared responsibility for team effectiveness. And the evidence that I've seen is that it does definitely improve the motivation and performance and standards and excellence of nearly everybody in the team. And lastly, we say we improve effectiveness and reliability through situationally specific strategies, processes, and practices. Situationally specific. We do what works, and we know it works because we've got the latest information, we've got the best input from powerful, motivated, engaged, and capable people, and from the customer themselves. And with all that together, our situationally specific strategy or process or practice or whatever decision we make is the most effective that we can make it. So I'll pause to take a breath, and I'll ask James to see if we've got any questions that we can throw in to take us through to the end of our webinar tonight. By the way, James, cover a couple of those topic questions, and then if you've got any admin questions, let's throw some of those in as well.
Yep. So change is good under Agile, but what if the change has such a high impact as to possibly cause the rework of delivered features?
Well, some Agile practitioners would say, well, to the client, to the customer, aren't we glad we found this now and not when it was even more expensive? You know, there's a certain element of saying, well, we suck it up because that's the great benefit of not having an even bigger loss and wastage. And yes, it happens, and yes, I've seen it happen. I've seen even large amounts of work thrown out the door because something has occurred, like a platform change. I've seen projects where you go down a certain path and suddenly it's, oh no, we're gonna change platforms. We're gonna build this software on something completely different. And no, we can't port it across. So 100% loss at that point. But you know, you only make those decisions and abandon the sunk cost if it's going to deliver you or deliver the customer a better value in the end. So you make those decisions with the customer and judiciously and appropriately. So if the sunk cost is too high, then maybe you'll go ahead and accept a lesser value because you haven't erased what you've done. But you only erase it if it's the right thing to do. And the important thing about the process or the methodology is that it puts you in the best possible position at the earliest possible time to make that decision. Doesn't mean it can't happen, it certainly can. What else, James?
Can individuals be shared across multiple concurrent Agile projects?
Oh, tough. You could ask the same question on traditional projects. It's a more generic question than that. You could also ask that question even if you don't talk about projects. Let's just talk about normal productivity. Can you have somebody in one department and then have them work on another day or another moment in another department and work somewhere else? The simple answer is we might think that they're doing it, but we will usually be causing significant damage to their productivity momentum. And productivity momentum is something that I think got talked about in some of the topic 1 pre-recorded audio. So there might be some areas there that are worth catching up in on the issue of productivity, momentum, and productivity efficiency. But when you have people that are able to have momentum of focus, they are usually at their best. And so mostly we would encourage people, and the whole point of having this time box of non-interruption where you say, all right, we've done our plans, now use your time box, you've got 2 weeks, get stuck into whatever you're going to do and let nothing get in your way. And that usually means you're going to find it hard if you're bouncing between projects at different times within that period of time. So at the very least, I would say if you've got people concurrently in different projects, don't mix them up within the same time box. Let them do one time box in one project and not bounce around from that. Let them get to the end of that time box before you even think about doing anything else with them. And even if you are thinking about doing anything else, you're going to have a lot of lost productivity as a result, in my opinion, as inevitable outcomes.
Another question?
Yeah, sorry, James. Next one.
Sure. Is there an optimal team size in Agile projects?
Most people would say small, but how big is big? Generally, you look at it from 2 points of view. I've already mentioned there's an advantage in physical proximity, and this is often your starting point for what's practical and what's feasible. And I've seen teams of up to half a dozen work very effectively because they could work in a fairly cozy environment. But I've also seen teams up to a dozen that have worked reasonably well. But you get a dozen people, and you're not usually going to have a dozen people working on things that are closely aligned. You're usually going to have sub-teams within that. And some philosophy says you just break people down in pairs. And they really only work closely as a team of 2 or occasionally 3. So it depends what you mean by team. And I mean, if you're building a big thing, you might need 50 people to do it. But you might have no more. You might have like 15 teams in your 50-man job or list. So it does also depend upon how many people you're going to have involved in any particular feature. Sometimes your features are what decide how big the team needs to be. And a particular feature might actually need 4 people to work on it because there's 4 different things and pieces of expertise, and therefore that's going to prescribe the number of teams. So, but I'm always talking about relatively small numbers and tight groups. I'm not talking about a team of 20. I think that would be a lot more unwieldy because remember we said before about clever interactions, and clever interactions tend to become a lot harder to leverage, exponentially more difficult the bigger your team becomes. Next question, James.
I don't remember it exactly, but on the topic of clever interactions, we had one earlier that asked for a suggestion of what you can provide a team, a real-world example of how to promote clever interactions.
How to promote clever interactions? One of the simplest and most coy ideas I saw was a espresso coffee machine in the middle of the work environment, and it was not an appropriate place for such a machine. But I mean, it sounds a bit. It sounds a bit silly, but the point was you need to create an acceptable pause in the concentration for the interaction to take place, because you've got 2 things. You want interaction to be mutual, and what I mean by that is that you don't really want team members to be constantly sliding over to the other person and bothering them when they're in the middle of a really difficult task. You want them to be subconscious, and subconscious means that one person gets up and goes to the water cooler or this or that or whatever, and that subconsciously enters the awareness of someone else, and they get up and do the same thing. And then they say, oh, what are you working on? I'm doing this. I had this trouble. And then the conversations about what's going on spawn from that. So it's about how you shape the environment. It's about an acceptability for having the ad hoc conversations and not storming over and saying, what are you 2 doing out of your chair? Get back to your desk and get back to work. That's sort of counterintuitive to that. So it's a culture thing, it's an environment thing, and sometimes if it's just not happening at all, find a couple of people and get them to be your champions and lead by example. And if you know 1 or 2 people are good at that, do that. Walk over to them and say, yeah, let's come get a cup of coffee. I want to chat about this problem that I'm working on right now. Maybe you can help me. So sometimes that might be necessary if you've got really a bunch of stoic people that are used to just sitting down at their desks all day. So hopefully that gives some helpful hints or suggestions. Let me put the poll results up for everyone whilst we're having a chat about all this.
Great. Yeah, I just had someone ask about that. Would you like to discuss the poll results, or do you want another question?
Give me another question, because the poll results are going to take a while to appear, and let people digest them, and then we'll have a chat in a moment.
All right. How would you suggest introducing Agile methodology into a traditional environment?
Well, this is a style question. Some would say slowly, carefully, diplomatically. Some would say with a fast-moving brick. I tend to be a believer in the philosophy of, everyone really does usually enjoy change once they contextualize it and understand it. So whether we're dealing with traditional project management or any other form of project management, we are inevitably dealing with change management. And we need to tap into our knowledge and our understanding of change management and understand why people might find challenges about such a change of switching methodologies, and why it might be a little scary, it might be a little bit unfamiliar, and all those normal things. But it doesn't matter whether they're changing desks or changing methodologies. It's largely the same thing, just on a different scale. And so by dealing with it via a buy-in process, via an inclusion process, a demystifying process, an education process, I mean, the best way to do it is to look and say, okay, we've got this project. It's got coming up. It's got all these big risks and challenges. We see some enormous difficulty in achieving these objectives using our current methodology, and we'd like some discussion about how other methodologies can help. And you might get a bunch of people saying, well, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, and then you can say, well, look, let's get our head around what the alternatives are, and let's all rush off and do a short course like this one, or read a book or something else, or let's have a workshop Monday morning or Friday afternoon or whatever, and let's talk about what these things mean, and go in there and facilitate it if you need to, and have a demystifying discussion about what is Agile and what is this and what is that, and ideally you want the team, or at least some of them, to be saying to you, maybe we should use Agile for this. Like it's just another methodology. It's just it's different. I mean, I have to say though one thing, that being someone that's done a lot of traditional waterfall projects in my career, and taught a lot of PMI project management, and now sort of being a extensive practitioner and teacher of Agile, you end up picking sides. You end up deciding that one or the other kind of fits you a little more comfortably. And sometimes when you discover how Agile suits you and suits your projects, it gets really hard to go back. But similarly, you'll find people that just can't move forward. And executive level of the organisation needs to accept that if you're going to make that kind of change, there will be casualties. Imagine, for example, if you had a sales team, a well-entrenched, well-experienced sales team, and you tell them, well, we're going to completely change the commission structure, and you're going to be remunerated and paid completely different. You're going to have some people that aren't cool with that, and they might go get a job elsewhere, or you might ask them to. Major structural change in an organisation is not without its pain, but the best way is to get them on board and buy in and promoting the idea, and try and identify up front the ones that just aren't going to make it, and either insulate them or find other reasons. And as the old saying goes, if you can't change the people, change the people. James, next question. We can carry on, but we've still got lots of people logged in, so
Thanks, Brenton.
We've got lots of questions, so keep them coming.
Yep. All right. Does Agile consider stale code or poor programming as waste? What can be done about it?
The important part of that question is whether or not it might or can still contribute to value. Stale code and poor code. Poor code could simply be something that's desperately needing another iteration to fix it. And that's one of the first questions. I mean, is this something that's only poor because it hasn't been refined enough? Or is it poor because someone did a really lazy job in the beginning? So there's the sunk cost question about poor code. Is it fixed with an iteration, or is it something that's actually going to cost more time and effort to fix, and someone perhaps a little more switched on, or a little more clever, or a little more motivated, maybe should start again? Those a part of the decision process you think about with poor code. Stale code, first question, does stale mean it's poor, or does stale simply means we've forgotten exactly what's in it, so we don't trust it? That's an important differentiator. Stale code can often be perceived as poor simply because we've forgotten how good or bad it really is, and it needs a little bit of investment of time and effort for somebody who can to look through it and give it that is it good, is it not assessment. So don't measure it because it's stale, measure it because it's good or not. And then you can make a better decision about whether or not you keep it because the sunk cost is high and the value is worth building on, or whether you ditch it because you are better off starting again with that particular area. And sometimes that's going to be influenced by what the customer is. I mean, I have seen a situation where the team wanted to ditch a piece of code, start again. The customer said, you can't do that. I need it live next Friday. Make it work. So, I mean, the customer is never out of these questions. They're never far from these sorts of discussions. Let me talk, James, just make a mention of what we see in this poll. There's a lot of people who obviously have a starting point that, the philosophy or tool set, which is generally aligned with, the message we're trying to give here. We obviously have a few people that hadn't yet had a lot of knowledge of how this works. One thing I was pleased to see is that there's not a lot of people that thought this was just some passing fad. Management fads, they have a certain paradigm, they have a certain fit, and usually after sort of 3 to 5 years after they come out, you start to see them being talked about less and less. And Agile is only growing exponentially, so it's clearly, by all accounts, it's not a fad. Looking at, actually, if you Google the concept of a management fad, Agile does not fit any of the technical requirements. Oh, actually, no, it does fit one. Management fads are deemed to be things that are follow with a whole bunch of consultants trying to get money out of it and training programs designed to teach people how to do it. Well, yeah, we did have a bit of that, and we still have a bit of that. But the interest and the adoption is increasing exponentially long after it's past that early creation period. So it's certainly here to stay, and I mean, it might be called something and look a bit different in the future. But I noticed, a number of people, nearly a quarter of our students, believed that it was somewhat free and relaxed and about freedoms, and some felt it was the opposite of that, and it was just another sort of strict method. So, I mean, it's kind of neither, and it's kind of a bit of both, and hopefully we've been able to give you a better picture, a bigger picture already, and we're only halfway through this particular course. So we've got 2 more, hopefully exciting discussions to take place. I do want to, I want to really encourage you all to get on and get hold of those pre-recorded audio, because they actually sometimes contain a little bit more true gold and data that we can cover in these webinars. So I would really encourage you to get into those, because they're different. They're different stuff, and they're elementary stuff that's going to really help what you get out of these webinars. James,
Brenton.
Yes, mate.
Just quickly, your microphone's volume is going up and down a bit. I suspect it's the GoToWebinar software trying to adjust the gain.
Maybe it's my volume moving a little closer. How about if I sit back a little bit, and then maybe it'll be a little bit more consistent, because I think I might be moving around a little bit much. This is just a side effect of me not going through my slides and notes. I'm now freewheeling, so my body language is responding by moving around too much. Not that you all wanted that detailed explanation, but that's what's happening, I suspect. How's that? Has it been a little bit more stable since you pointed this out?
It went up and then it's gone back down again.
Okay.
If you just want to really quickly press settings next to the
yep.
Where is it? Up at the top. If you can get into audio settings and just turn off the adjust microphone gain in the audio settings in preferences.
Right, done that.
Down the bottom there'll be a checkbox, automatically adjust my system mixer settings. If you just switch that off, it'll stay consistent.
How's that now? Is that coming through a little bit more consistent? I've switched it off, so let's try it. Let's
it
have
is.
a question.
So it's just a bit quieter, so just get a bit closer to your mic and it'll be fine then.
All right, there we go. Tech support on the fly, everybody. That's Agile tech support for you, right there in the making. Give us another question, James. We'll test out this new microphone setting.
Sure. Do you see Agile as a replacement for the traditional waterfall approach, or is there still room for waterfall for certain projects?
Absolutely, there is room for it. And if I was going to build a bridge, I would definitely not be using Agile to build a bridge. There's Any form of project where you either have or need an exceptionally clear understanding of what it's going to look like and how it's going to look. Any construction project, typically, you're going to need waterfall style thing, and it's, you know, we're going to be doing that sort of thing like forever. So there's never going to be a situation where we're done with waterfall, because there's always going to be things that are highly prescribed or prescriptive about exactly what needs to happen, and it's just absolutely got to be this. And yet, what Agile is about is, well, what about when it's not that? So Agile is a competitor in the sense that it's an alternative, and there are some projects that might sit on the border in between that are, you know, half-half, and they're going to be the debatable ones. But there'll always be those ones that they're not empirical. And if they're not empirical, then they're really not going to benefit anywhere near as much, if at all, from Agile. And they may suffer for it because they really should be following a plan. So yeah, I think there's definitely, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. See, there's a movement going on at the moment, which and there's a methodology that I'm part of, which is about the creative process. Because software is generally an engineering process, even though it's sort of engineering a creative thing. But there's research coming out now that says that there's a methodology able to be found in the decision-making processes, and this comes from creative processes. So when you talk about software and user experience design and things like that, you know, I think we're going to find even more perhaps vertical, diverse, specific variations in the same way that we've got Lean, we've got extreme programming, and we've got Scrum, and you know, these are somewhat horses for courses, and different projects and different teams will work better with some, and many will be an amalgam of these things. And I think there'll be a few more that will crop up and get on that list as time goes on. More questions, James?
Yep. We've had one that says, speaking of tech support, how do Agile and ITIL work together?
That's a good question. It's a fairly broad question. How do they work together? I mean, ITIL by its nature is fairly prescriptive in what it's trying to do, and where ITIL came from with the British government was to try and come up with a standardization of practices that says if you adhere to these practices and principles, you will be able to achieve a certain standard. So in that sense, there is a similarity of saying, well, any Agile methodology is going to also say if you adhere to a certain set of principles and practices, then you will be able to maintain a standard of delivery. And I say that in comparison to those projects that some of you might have come across that aren't really Agile, they're just chaos in motion. And you know, we kind of know that there's probably more of those out there than we'd like to admit. But then different elements of ITIL go into much more prescriptive detail about exactly how you should do things. And this is where Agile doesn't go down that path. So I guess if you're asking how do they work together, it depends. If you're talking about using Agile to build something that's going to work in an ITIL environment later, it kind of really depends on where those crossovers occur. You know, I mean, I was involved in a project, or saw a project rather, for a help desk, the rollout of a help desk system. Now the help desk system used ITIL practices and methodology as part of its management of IT and tech support, but the implementation of it was very Agile in nature. And so in that sense, it worked very well together because, you know, the tech support and the IT team were the customer. That's the customer hat that they had. And they worked in with the Agile environment. They actually found it very enjoyable and highly refreshing to step outside of the straitjacket that they're used to working in. But obviously, tech support and IT support is a lot more strict about service level agreements and legal contractual obligations with specific outcomes. And those are not necessarily Agile in nature. We can't play fast and loose with those. Next one, James. We'll go for another 5 minutes. We'll go to the top of the hour. And we have to apologize in advance to anyone that doesn't get their question answered because we've actually got heaps of them. But I just want to encourage everyone, that's what the forums are for. I promise you I will answer every question you put in the forums at some point. I can't promise I'll answer them all tonight, absolutely, but I will make sure that, if someone else doesn't, I will get in and chat about it. So please do put them up there if we don't cover them tonight. So James, you've got another one?
Yep. Is Agile suitable for a common repeating project, such as a quarterly report?
Possibly the first time, but I would suspect that it depends. I mean, you have to ask yourself, if it's repetitive, is it empirical? And it might be empirical if you say that the contents of the report are vastly different each time, and what goes in it and how it gets created, etc. And if that requires decisions that rely upon timely information. And there's your crux of it. If what you're doing is going to rely a lot on decisions which you'll need to make with information that's only going to be valuable at a later stage, or it's going to have to be explored to be found, and it's only going to be known once other factors have been determined, then you have a project that might be empirical enough that it's going to benefit more from Agile than from anything else. And alternatively, that might be the case the first time, but if you're going to repeat, it's sort of how much of it are you going to repeat? And if you're repeating the decisions and you're repeating the information and there's a high degree of predictability out of that repetition, maybe not so Agile next time around. But those are the tests you need to apply and think about when you make that decision. Next one, James. Time for 3 more, I think.
How do you sell Agile in a traditional project management corporate environment?
Kelsey made a good point last week about this. It's got to begin at the top. You're not going to have much success pushing in Agile from the ground up, at least not fast and not in a sane and rational way. I have seen a situation where grassroots changes took place and it became this big wave of change that management was just forced to accommodate. And the hard part there was that management resisted it because they didn't want to be told how to run their company by the people in it. And so they had to find a way to agree to this change without losing face, and that took a long time and was very painful. But if you start at the top, if you can get management to see the benefits and the applicability of Agile, and let's keep in mind that Agile is a pretty broad concept, and what's going to work specifically for your organization and for your kind of projects, it's going to be particular elements of Agile structured in a particular way. So try and avoid the mistake of saying we're going to be Agile and that's going to be good, because everyone's going to have a slightly different view. As our poll suggests, everyone's going to have a different view on what you mean by that A word. So I'd suggest have your strategy to sell this idea by saying, well, here's the challenges we see with this kind of project, and here's the different aspects of other methodologies that we can use that will help us do that. And yeah, some people call it Agile, but actually we're going to call it our thing, whatever, our version of this, that, and the other combined. And that's going to work for us because we're going to pick it and choose it and make sure it does. And that would be a strategy that I think you should consider and go through when you try to do it. Second last question, James?
Yep. Is there a difference between success and excellence?
Yes, I think there is. Excellence is an intention. Excellence is a standard. Excellence is something you aspire to. So excellence, the measure of excellence is the gap between what you've done and what you could have done. It's the gap between your potential and your actual. So excellence lies there. So if we do something with excellence, we're doing it pretty close to as good as we probably could have done with all reasonable things being considered. And if we underperform, then that's not excellence. But that's very different when you're talking about value, the results. We measure excellence by knowing what our potential, and sometimes we get input from others, but whether or not something that we've delivered with our excellence is satisfactory or delivers value or is good enough for their purpose is something else. We know the situation where you can have people who perform at their very best and they're just not the best people available to us, or they're just not, we know that they have limitations and their best might not meet the requirements at the other end. And so there's a difference and a disparity between the two, and it's based on where it's measured, how it's measured and who measures it. That's the crux of the difference in my view. Only time for one more question tonight. We do have to wrap up at some point, so we'll get one more question in there. And then any admin back-end questions, James, that you've got that people are still hanging in for that they need to know.
Yep. We haven't had heaps of admin type questions this week. They were mostly last week. Everyone's been on the system now, and Alex has answered a lot of the admin questions by text tonight. Mostly just the information that go to learn.itmasters.edu.au, log in there, go to the discussion forum.
Yep.
And if you don't have to log in for that, just email at us at info@itmasters.edu.au. So we'll just go to the last question on content, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Is Agile suitable for IT infrastructure projects? I guess as opposed to software development. As opposed to software.
Well, I'm thinking back. I mean, I've done some software infrastructure projects in years gone by. I've rolled out national networks, both for customers and internally, wholesale networks as well. And I would say that there is a certain amount of flexibility that we need to have with our plans and in the execution of those plans. But for those types of projects, typically there are certain decisions in terms of planning and preparation that you have to make within certain timeframes. So you have things that need to happen in a somewhat sequential basis. You need to have certain things ready before other things. So these dependencies are a little more indicative of a waterfall process, because you have this flow on of, you need certain things before you can connect certain things to it, and then you need things configured and figured out and architected before you can then implement them and put them in. And there's no point having equipment when there's nothing to plug it into, etc. So dependencies are probably a lot more important in infrastructure projects than they would be in, for example, software projects, because yes, you're going to build a piece of software, but really it doesn't quite matter so much whether you build this feature first or that feature first. Yes, sometimes it does, but there's generally a lot more flexibility. So I would say that knowing what I know now about the breadth of available project management methodologies, I would have used for my projects a mostly serial, sequential, dependency, plan-oriented, waterfall type of project, but I probably would have had more iterative type meetings and discussions to keep track of where things might have gone off track, because most infrastructure projects that I've seen, they have one thing that's a little bit different from other things, and that's a tight deadline. And the tight deadline is something that plays into the hands of Agile, because you can make sure that you have your iterative meetings and your planning meetings and your regular catch-ups with the key people to make sure that you are promptly responding to anything that's going on. And usually, although I did say that, yes, there's dependencies, there's also, you're typically dealing with people all of the capable technology level and can fix problems and get clever input to things when they come up, because usually infrastructure things, they're not easy unless you're dealing with people that have done it all before. There's always something new to learn. There's always some new problem to have happen. So I would still be using the frequent discussion and the empowered individual elements that I've learned from Agile and put them into my plan-based approach to that. So hopefully that gives you at least some answer to the. I mean, there's obviously there's no hard and fast answer to any of these things, but hopefully what we've been able to give you, especially the last couple of nights and in the pre-recorded audio, is enough of a starting point of a background knowledge so that you can start to piece together what you need to know to be making these decisions and making good decisions along the way. So look, I apologise, we're not going to have time for any more questions tonight. We will wrap it up there. I do thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you for the streams of questions that have come through. Again, I want to strongly encourage everyone to get onto the portal, get hold of those pre-recorded lectures. You might have lots of your questions answered in those. I really hope that we're going to be able to do that. And anything else, please put them on the forums. We'd love to have a more active discussion there. And until next week, stay tuned. We will have more pre-recorded lectures. We'll have another webinar, same time next week. And we hope to see lots and lots of you then. So until then, thanks very much and good night.